It is a cold winter day in Stuttgart, Germany, but this is a good place to spend a cold winter day because there are two iconic car museums in this town. The Porsche Museum and the Mercedes-Benz Museum. I'm going to go through both of them today. I'll tell you what I like best. Let me start off with this museum, which is the better known of the two, the Mercedes-Benz Museum. It's located in the northwest part of Stuttgart. And this is a really impressive building. It's kind of a circular building built in 2006, so it's about 15 years old, but very impressive, very well thought out. You start off by going to the top of the museum and then working your way down in kind of a circular fashion. And it could take you, if you wanted to, if you stopped at every exhibit, it would literally take you the whole day to go through this museum. Most people will probably spend a couple of hours here. You start off at the top and everything is chronological, and so these early vehicles were built in the 1880s, and they're either original or they're prototypes that were built to exact specifications based on the vehicles that Mr. Daimler and Mr. Benz built back in that era. The architecture in this building is so well thought out. They clearly designed this with the whole exhibit in mind, and what they do is they walk you through a timeline of what's going on in the world at the time, whether it be the building of the Eiffel Tower or later on the Titanic sinking, which happened in 1912, and they compare that to what was going on in the automobile world and in the innovations with Mercedes-Benz at the time. And so it's a unique timeline where you start in the 1880s and you wind yourself down. One of the most unique eras, I think, was the 1930s, which are these cars you see here, which were really striking and beautiful. And you can walk through and take a close-up look at some of these cars, which have sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars on the collector's market before. The 50s, of course, was like the golden era of automobile history. You had some classic designs, including the Mercedes Gullwing, which they have on display here, and you can peek your head into it and take a close look. Meanwhile, you continue on down the exhibit and you see the images on the wall, all stories that you know, whether it be John F. Kennedy or the Beatles, and you just like to stop and read these, as well as comparing the automobiles of the era. I found this interesting. This is Nicolas Cage's Mercedes-Benz from the early 1990s. It's part of a larger exhibit which shows Mercedes-Benz that were driven by famous people, and even has this old-school Mercedes limousine that German dignitaries used to ride around in, and so the exhibit was kind of cool. I'm just not sure why Nicolas Cage is the best actor they could find that liked to drive a Mercedes-Benz, but that's a story for another day, I guess. This cool exhibit shows the different safety innovations that Mercedes-Benz has introduced over the years. And then you move down to a lower level, and it shows the different race cars that Mercedes-Benz has been responsible for. And in fact, the bottom two lower sections of the whole building show various different race cars that Mercedes-Benz has produced and built over the years. Now, I was really excited at the bottom of the museum to see these simulators which simulate race car driving in a Mercedes-Benz. Now, as somebody who is in the simulation business, and I know a lot about these type of simulators, I can tell you these are very expensive, high-tech machines here, $1 million simulators. But I really wasn't too blown away once I got in and experienced it. I think they've dialed it down a little bit, and they've really only got one small screen, and so even though the motion base is pretty impressive, I think that these simulators, they're still worth it. It's only €4 to go and try it out. But I wouldn't wait in a long line. If you happen to be there on a busy day, it's not worth waiting in a long line. But you do get in and you get to experience what it's like to drive around a race car in different eras of a Mercedes-Benz. And it's about 4 or 5 minutes long, and you drive along. And once again, if it's a short line, it's probably worth the €4 to go and spend and enjoy it. But probably not worth waiting a half an hour for it. Now, as you complete the timeline and you're down kind of in the bottom of the museum, you get to the concept vehicles and the future of Mercedes-Benz. And they've got some really cool vehicles to see here as well. But I do have one criticism, and that is there is not one vehicle, not one car in this entire museum that you can get into. And as a former Mercedes-Benz owner, I was a little upset at that. One of the things Mercedes-Benz does best, more than any other car manufacturer, is they build beautiful interiors, and there is not one vehicle you can open up and get inside here. And visiting the Toyota factory a few years ago, they let you in and you can play around with the dials and you can see what it's like to be in a brand new Lexus or a brand new Toyota, but not Mercedes-Benz here. That's one weak link here in this museum. Now, they do drop you off into a beautiful gift shop, and there's all sorts of different gifts that you can get and accessory items and paraphernalia. If you want a Mercedes jacket or a Mercedes pin, it's all right here. Okay, on the other side of town, about 6 miles northeast of the Mercedes-Benz Museum, is the Porsche Platz. There's a subway stop here, and this is the Porsche Museum. It cost €100 million to build this thing. Opened about 10 years ago in 2009. And it's another super awesome building. Out front, they've got this weird but totally awesome structure with 3 Porsches on top. It's almost like some sort of statue or emblem as you walk into the museum. And then you buy your tickets and you go up this huge escalator. It's an extremely long escalator. You're going up about 5 different flights until you get to the top. And once again, at the top, you're kind of going back in time and you're greeted by some of the first Porsches that were ever produced. Now you learn about Ferdinand and his son Ferry. Now, Ferdinand was a Nazi, but they don't mention that much in this museum. They do, however, show a lot of the early prototypes, the early cars from the 30s, and of course not much done in the 40s with the war going on, but then in the 50s and 60s. And it is really neat to walk around this. In fact, unlike the Mercedes-Benz Museum, where there's a lot of different stuff from the 1880s, 1890s, 1900s, in this museum, it's more a focus on cars over the last 40 or 50 years, and so in some ways it's more interesting in this museum to see the cars, and a lot of them, of course, Porsches are a sports car, more of a racing heritage, and so you see cars that are, I saw my dream car, which was a 1980s version 959, and it was here in this museum, and so the cars themselves kind of cooler even in this museum than they were in the Mercedes-Benz Museum. A lot more of the newer cars that are on display here, and you even get to go inside one of them, which is kind of nice. You didn't get to do that over in Mercedes-Benz. The unfortunate thing is Porsches are not known for their spectacular interiors. They're kind of bare bones, but that's all right. You still can hop inside and take a look on what it's like to be behind the wheel of one of these things. Really easy to spend a couple of hours in this museum. Once again, you can take more or less time if you want. You can go through and stop at every exhibit, read about every car. I don't think most people will do that. Once you're done, you go down the escalator that you came up. And so unlike the Mercedes-Benz Museum where you're working your way all the way down, there's a little bit less to see here. It's probably at the very most a half a day, and I anticipate most people will spend, an hour and a half to 2 hours in this particular museum. Porsche Museum had a great gift shop as well. It wasn't quite as stacked or as big as the Mercedes gift shop, but there's still plenty to buy. And then both of them have a restaurant and a cafe. I actually ate lunch and had this pizza, which was delicious, in the Porsche Museum. And so get yourself something good to eat. In the end, both the Porsche Museum and the Mercedes-Benz Museum are can't miss. I like them both. I'd probably give the edge slightly to the Mercedes Museum, but if you're in Stuttgart and you have at least a half a day, plan to see both museums. They're spectacular.